Ship. I'm your host, Spirit Bird, shamanic teacher, healer, and author, here to guide you on your journey to becoming your most potent spiritual leader. Have you been hearing the call to expand your spiritual gifts and step into your next level of conscious leadership? If you're a coach, healer, or a spiritual leader, you can learn more about Shaman School and growing your spiritual business on our website, HoltonHealingArts.com. Or send me a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Hello and welcome. I am so excited today to introduce you to three really special guests for our series on working with entheogens and psychedelics. And in particular, today we're going to be looking at women in psychedelics, women's wellness, and this beautiful spot where science and spirituality is meeting within this field. So I'd like to introduce you to Betsy Oliver, who has been working with entheogens for over 14 years. She has a career ranging from being a wilderness guide to public relations. She's being very modest. She has a really strong belt in working with grassroots organizations and making social change initiatives. And she is a life coach and a plant medicine integration specialist. Hello, Betsy. Jennifer Chesek is the author of Psilocybin Handbook for Women. So she is a medical journalist and an adjunct professor with a master's of science in journalism. Very excited to dive in with you today, Jennifer. And then Andrea Schumann is a body worker and Ayurvedic practitioner. She's a master herbalist and a formulator, and she's recently created Microdrops as the first of many offerings to make microdosing more effective and help empower women and femmes to take back their mental health story and narrative. And I personally have been playing around with your beautiful product, Andrea, so I'm excited to share more about that as well. So welcome, everyone. So I wanted to just introduce this initial entry point with women's health. And Jennifer, I'll go ahead and start with you with what you're seeing in that field, why women are kind of reaching outside of sort of traditional medical field to get their needs met.
Absolutely. Great question. So it's interesting. There are these global drug surveys that go out every year. And I think it was in 2020, the global drug survey showed that more women are actually using some psychedelics than men. But it was interesting to dive into the research a little further, because what it's really showing is that women are using psychedelics to self-treat for conditions that they're not getting a lot of action from in the Western medical community. So they're struggling with that. And to just kind of put it into perspective of how far behind we are on women's health, it's interesting because it wasn't until like the early 1990s that women were even included in medical studies in like early stage clinical trials. And so that's really frustrating. So we're really far behind. And to put that even into more perspective, if you think about when we had the first drug for male sexual dysfunction, which was essentially Viagra, that came out in 1999. And we're all familiar with the name of that drug, right? But what's interesting is we didn't even have a full picture of female anatomy in terms of like the internal structures of the clitoris. We didn't have that until 2005 when someone did a woman, she did some functional MRI imaging to get the complete picture of the clitoris. So going back, in 1998, we had a medication for male sexual dysfunction. Didn't know the full picture of the clitoris until 2005. It wasn't until a decade later that women got a medication for female sexual dysfunction. I bet none of us actually know the name of it. I had to look it up before I came on here today, and I think it's called Addyi or something like that. That was 2015. So that's crazy to me. And really, to put that even into more context, there are 40%, roughly 40% of women of reproductive age have some type of sexual dysfunction. And it goes even higher. It gets up to close to the 85% when people have gone through menopause. So why was no one focusing on that? I think that's really frustrating. This month is Endometriosis Awareness Month. I've been struggling with endometriosis since I was 21 and I'm 44 right now. And the National Institutes of Health, they only designated in the previous year, they only designated 0.1%. It was actually less than 0.1% of funding towards endometriosis. So it's no wonder that that we're starting to turn towards plant medicines to help us with these types of issues and conditions, symptoms related to conditions. And I'm seeing a lot of promise coming out of the current research right now. Plus, we have a lot of indigenous wisdom to lean on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, actually, on that note, I would love, actually, Betsy, I would love to chime in with you on the different ways that we can use psychedelics in our lives. Jennifer, you mentioned for some health reasons, but there's of course a whole broad spectrum of ways we can use psychedelics in our everyday life, and it doesn't have to be something that's extreme or to treat something that's extreme. So I'd love to hear from you, Betsy, around where you can see this work folding into just like general wellness within our lives.
Yeah, it's something I'm passionate about because right now where we're at in 2023, the news media is loving the emergence of psychedelic research. And especially it's really being touted in a way as a magic bullet for solving some of our societal problems like depression and trauma and autoimmune disorders. And I think in some ways that narrative is going to cause some problems potentially, because we're seeing this as this is going to fix all of these problems, and we hear these exciting fireworks stories about people who have like a one-time experience and it changes everything for them, and it's all within a very medical context. And as we're talking about medical trials and FDA approval and things like that, the risk is that these ancient medicines, especially the plant and fungus medicines, what we call entheogens, get sucked into the medical industrial model and become something that has to be prescribed. You have to take it in a clinical setting. You have to work with a licensed medical practitioner, and you have to have a diagnosis of a pretty severe mental health or similar issue in order to benefit from them. I'm active in the decriminalization movement here in Alaska, where I live. And the concept behind decrim or decriminalization is these natural occurring plants and fungi are part of nature, and we should have and do have the right as humans who are also part of nature to have a relationship with those. And what I see in my coaching practice is there are a lot of people who are hearing these exciting stories coming through the media and they're inspired, but they may not fit into one of these categories where a medical approach would work for them. They're inspired around the idea of personal growth or healing their past trauma that may not be to the level of a diagnosable PTSD. And that's really where I took my life coaching and fused it with the psychedelic integration. Is just naturally, I saw that a huge percentage of my clients had had experiences with psychedelics, either ceremonies or what they thought was going to be a recreational experience that ended up blowing their minds, or they're microdosing or they're interested in microdosing, and they're using these because that helps them understand what's possible for them, a new story about who they really are. They're really inspired by what happens in these altered states of consciousness, and then they're looking for support through coaching or integration to figure out, how do I take this mind-blown experience and integrate it into who I am each day? How does this impact my relationships? How does it impact my relationship with myself? How does it impact how I show up at work or in my community? And really doing the homework, if you will, of creating a life that aligns with this exciting potential that they're touching into in their work with psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. I'm just thinking back on, the Jennifer, what you're sharing, which it's so true that, women and especially anything that happens in our health or mental health or biological health tends to kind of be on the fringes for a while before we get to actually look at it. And with a lot of women's health stuff being pushed to the side, there's a way that some of the conventional medical system is leaving us behind. But then also as a result, what we're doing as women is creating new ways of being in the world, or at least remembering new ways of being in the world. And Andrea, I want to bring you in here because I love the work that you're doing specifically on that front of reimagining some of our health and wellness. And I'll let you share a little bit more. But one of the things I love about, well, you do many things, but in particular, Microdrops is kind of at the forefront of what you're working on right now. And what I love about them is you're using different plants, not just psychedelics, but you're using different plants to bring into our health. And you're doing it in a way that makes it really, really beautiful and pleasurable and enjoyable versus like a regimen that we have to do. And I think sometimes especially when we get into some spiritual practices or health and wellness practices, we get into them because we want to get some freedom, but then we end up getting kind of tied to them as like, I have to do this or else, my life will not be good anymore. So I'd love to have you just share a little bit more about what you're up to in your work, what you're seeing in your field, and kind of take it from there.
Great. Thank you so much. And so I'm grounding all of my ADHD tendencies to be so excited about everything that you've all said that I just want to like spread out and be like, yeah, this and this. And I do want to reflect just a little bit about Microdrops is something that came out of my personal experience, experiencing women's health, working with women in various stages of, reproductive life. So I was just like cheering when Jennifer was talking about, because literally in my mind was, we didn't even map the clitoris until very recently. And then she said it and I was like, yeah, you picked a good bunch. So yeah, I just want to reflect on that, because Microdrops was really born out of my own experience being on the patient end of care. I had been so used to being in the space of being the practitioner, being the one who had the answers, being the formulator, being the problem solver. As an Ayurvedic practitioner, I really often saw women that were coming to me really at the end of their rope. Like usually by the time they got to me, they'd already been rejected by the Western medical system. They had already gone through the ringer of all the testing. They had already basically just been sent on their merry way without any true help. Or they were being mired down with medications that were causing their own problems. I am the daughter of my mother, who is 30 years on antidepressants as a result of severe childhood trauma that resurfaced. My father has been on opiates since 1997 for chronic pain. So I like to say I'm a child of the pharmaceutical industry and what happens when you let unchecked money and power run our healthcare system. So I've got a lot on the topic of how I got to Microdrops is really just like I started researching when I was struggling with weaning depression, something that people don't often think about. We think about postpartum depression. It's a very popular thing to talk about and treat, but the thing that we don't always understand is that any major shift in the hormones can have a major shift in all of the body. And one of those big shifts that we often don't even acknowledge or recognize as a thing is that when women stop breastfeeding, you can have a really similar situation that you have in postpartum depression, depending on the chemistry inside the individual's body. And for me, I didn't really even notice the slide initially until I found myself in a very dark, very frustrated, very irritated place where I just couldn't communicate well. And I couldn't run my other business. My head was really foggy. And although I had all of the intellectual tools to help myself out of the space, I didn't have the emotional resources to even think of what I needed to do. And so, the first step was that I got a hand up from a colleague who is a naturopath who said, hey, you're going to remember how to deal with all of yourself once we get you, a little bit lifted above water, gave me a formula, got me here. And then the next thing I got was a formula of a microdosing tincture. And I've been using psychedelics since I was a teenager, recreationally. So very familiar with the medicine, but had never approached microdosing until I guess around 2017. And I was given this microdosing tincture that on one use of it, I was like, all of a sudden, my entire perspective space was shifted for a moment, just long enough for me to be able to see what was going on in my life, long enough for me to be able to look around and be like, how did I get down here into the bottom of this well? And how am I going to get myself back out? So I started in the process of research, and like Jennifer was starting to talk about, statistically, what's been done in women's health is, I mean, downright atrocious. It's just straight patriarchy when you look through the history of women in medical care. And to the point now where you have women with endometriosis, they're still being treated with drugs to stop their periods. They're being treated with all kinds of birth control that doesn't actually solve the problem. It may stop the pain temporarily. It may stop the cyclical growth of the endometriosis, but it certainly doesn't get to the root of the problem. And as somebody who had struggled with those things myself, I'm sensitive to shifts in societal conversation, like the commercials that I started seeing in the early 2000s for Sarafem, a treatment for PMDD. And I wanted to know, what is Sarafem? So in my launching into my research that ended up being microdrops, I ran across health data straight up on the CDC website, completely accessible, no conspiracies here, absolutely out in the open, to tell you that patriarchy is alive and well in the pharmaceutical industry. One of the big things to know is that 75 million people in the United States and growing are on a psychiatric medication. Over 50 million of those are antidepressants. Women are twice as likely to be medicated on an antidepressant as men. And Sarafem is Prozac. There is no difference in the drug. It is the same drug. So when Sarafem, I'd like everyone to take a moment to listen to the word Sarafem. Who are we marketing this to? Who are we talking to? This happened at a really specific time. And so this is really one of the things that got under my skin and made me feel like I needed to create something different. Prozac lost its exclusive use patent 2 years before that loss was set to come up. PMDD was added to the DSM. And then the very year that they lost their exclusive use patent, Sarafem was released to you. So that this was a absolutely conscious transition from one monetary source to another monetary source. We decided that since other companies were allowed to make Prozac now, and that drug was out to the market, we were going to have a single exclusive use that was directed specifically at women with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, a disease that had been created for the drug. So I think it's really important to understand that when we look at diseases like this, that they are a group of symptoms. They are not a disease in and of themselves. And once we start really looking at what's going on in the pharmaceutical industry, we can start seeing larger patterns of what's going on societally. And there is every reason right now to look towards plant medicines. And when I say plant medicines, I don't only mean entheogens. As you know, an Ayurvedic practitioner, I very much come from the training that herbs like friends, herbs work in communities, herbs and fungi work together to create a specific direction for people. The same herb can be used in completely opposing ways. So it really depends on the things that they're used with. So women being overprescribed these medications is a real passion point for me, and why I, as a child of somebody on these medications for 30 years, she came off of them with microdrops and with the use of microdosing psilocybin. She's been free of them for, I want to say, 9 months now. And it's amazing. And I'm getting to know my mom. And I got to say that, I'm getting to know my mom because I didn't know who she was before. So this is why I created microdrops. This is why I wanted to give people another thing to try before they go running to their doctor saying, I'm a little sad, and they walk out with a prescription. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answered your question. That was my meandering way of saying, yep. Yeah. And absolutely. And what Betsy said about the magic pill, we could just go on for days. So I'm so excited about this group of people you brought together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing part of yeah, part of your journey. And I'm so excited to hear how that has changed your mom's life, your life, people around you. Yeah. Betsy, I kind of want to pop back over to you because I feel like you're sitting on some things. I don't have a direct question.
I'm so inspired by what I'm hearing. I love the depth of facts and information that I'm hearing from both Andrea and Jennifer about this topic. And it's part of, I sometimes say, I think psychedelics are going to break modern medicine. They're going to break pharmaceutical mindsets, the culture that we've built. There's this idea, the way I see it is so much of modern pharmaceuticals is one problem, one molecule. We're going to identify what's the deficiency in your body that's causing your current problem, and we're going to put in a patch through a pill or an injection or whatever molecule we're going to do the plug. And that's just not how psychedelics work as a healing modality. And it's something that, like I said, I watch a lot of these studies coming out, and they are struggling so hard to fit psychedelics into double-blind trials, ruling out placebo trials, all of these things. And it's good that it's happening, right? Because this is how culture is going to change, and this is how these shifts are going to happen. And I'm certainly not against the scientific method or these processes at all. They're a very amazing and powerful way to create reproducible data. And the way psychedelics work is so outside of that model. It's not you have this problem and psilocybin or fill in the blank model is going to come in and fix that problem in your body. And I'd be curious to hear what the other folks here feel about that, and how you're processing and how you talk to even your audience about the way that psychedelics are actually having a healing impact on the body, whether that's the emotional and or the physical healing mechanisms that we have.
Yeah, Jennifer. Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And also, one of the places that I think you're passionate about is that mixture of indigenous wisdom and science as well. So it feels like it's similar here or related.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So when I was doing some of my research, I spoke with a woman. Her name is Natalie Villanova, and she's done a lot of work on actually the space of consent in psychedelics. So when you're with a practitioner or whatever, are we making sure that there's consent for touch and things like that? And so unrelated, she was talking about, we can talk about that later if we want, but unrelated to that, she brought up this idea of the two-eyed seeing. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's a concept that helps to merge Western science with indigenous wisdom. It's like we can't discount indigenous wisdom because it is a scientific method. People have been using these plant medicines for thousands of years, and they have the experience, and they've been doing the thing over and over. Just like in science, you do it over and over to reproduce results. But indigenous wisdom has done that already, and we have a lot of information about through indigenous wisdom. So now with this sort of research renaissance about psychedelics, sure, we're having all the science come at us, but we still have to merge the two. And so this two-eyed seeing concept came about. It was first introduced by, I think his name is, I'm just going to pull up my notes here, Elder Albert Marshall of the Ekassoni First Nation. And so he first brought this concept to the idea of Western medicine, and how do we look at both ways of seeing, hence the two-eyed seeing. So what was really fascinating to me was to kind of try to pull that into some of the research that I had done on if we're dealing with conditions like premenstrual dysphoric disorder, so PMDD, as Andrea was already discussing, how do we look at it from we've got some information coming out now about psilocybin and PMDD, for example, and then we've got this information that people have been using for thousands of years. And so I did speak to an indigenous healer. Her name is Mama de Lamaiko. That's her handle on Instagram. And she walked me through how to use psilocybin if you are having some difficulties with your menstrual cycle. She focuses on womb care. And so she's been doing this for a long time. And so she talked about when in your cycle is a good time to, if you're going to do like a full experience with a psychedelic, when to do that. It's better to do that during your ovulatory period rather than as you get closer to when you actually are about to get your period. Because as you get closer to when you get your period, your body is needing a lot of nutrients, and many of us fast before a psychedelic experience. So it's better to do that during the ovulatory period because we have a lot more bodily energy during that time. So that was really fascinating to me to hear from her, and then bridge that with some new information that's coming out now about the menstrual cycle and how psychedelics may affect the menstrual cycle. There's a few case studies, so we don't have like full science on this yet, but some researchers at the Psychedelic and Consciousness Research Center at Johns Hopkins have looked into how psychedelics are affecting women's menstrual cycles. And psilocybin in particular appears to be potentially helping to I guess, re-regulate menstrual cycles when they've become unregulated. Again, all we have is anecdotal reports and case studies of this, but there is some consistency in this. So, for example, the case study was on 3 women, and 2 of the women used psychedelics. One of them had a premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and the other was later diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, so PCOS. And what was interesting was that after they used psilocybin, their menstrual cycles started a little bit earlier than when they were expecting them to. 2 of the women also had a return to having a period after a period of amenorrhea where they did not have their periods. And then all of them, I believe, reported that their cycles kind of became more regular after using a psychedelic. And again, just 2 of them were using psilocybin. So I found that really interesting. And if you're curious about what are the mechanisms of that, so our cycle happens along the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And then we also have another axis that overlaps with that. And that's the cycle happens on the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. And then we also have another axis that is our stress response. And that's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So we've got the HPG axis, and the HPA axis, and they overlap. And when you take a psychedelic, or when you take psilocybin very specifically, is what I researched, that the serotonin, the binding to the serotonin receptors happens along that HPA axis. And so serotonin is a huge regulator of our stress response. And so there's just this mechanism where there's this overlap, and then there's this bidirectional relationship where the HPG axis is impacting the HPA axis and vice versa. So that's likely how, if there is this potential for re-regulating our cycles if they become unregulated, that would be the potential mechanism. There would be other hormones involved, but it's just all very fascinating to me. So I'm excited about the new research, hoping that we get more. And I love that. So the case studies were done by two female doctors, and I'm excited that they're really pushing this and looking into it. But I'm also really glad we have people like Mama De La Mico to tell us what people have been doing for ages in indigenous wisdom. So yeah,
sure,
thank you.
I'm kind of smiling because I'm thinking about, it's interesting. It's interesting to have, some of the studies and see what's possible with working with the plants. But then, of course, the plants are also their own intelligence. So they're going to work with us individually as needed. And I'm just giggling to myself because it's like, oh my God, I had never actually thought about like timing it with my cycle. But then most of the time when I'm using entheogens, I happen to be generally with groups of women. So I can plan what I want, and my body and the way the medicine works tends to take over and do what it wants to do. And I feel like most of the time when I'm working in ceremony space, my cycle tends to come in. So that's just my own experience.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in again. I just had one brief thing to add from Mama De La Mico. So she was talking about if you're going to microdose to potentially help with your cycle, it's good to give it about 3 months of time in terms of microdosing. She said you plant the seeds and they'll grow in 3 months, essentially was the metaphor that she used. And so if people are curious about that and are trying microdosing for whatever reason, make sure to give it that 3 months to see what actually would happen. So, sorry.
I want to totally echo what Michaela, Mama de la Maiko mentioned to you, because it's absolutely true. And it's also just a piece of wisdom for fertility for people, that you, whatever you're conceiving with, the material you're conceiving with, you laid that down 3 months ago. So it doesn't matter if you did a fast, or a cleanse or psilocybin or any sort of experience, the egg that will be conceiving that child was from 3 months ago. So it is a really important piece of wisdom. I wanted to also mention, Betsy had mentioned kind of breaking the pharmaceutical mindset. And this is a really interesting line to walk, because there is such interesting studies happening, right? And like we want to be like, yeah, psilocybin is going to like help you with your PMDD, and that would be great. If that's the outcome, then great. From an Ayurvedic practitioner perspective, we always approach from the idea that you never give all the heavy lifting to one part of your life. So you never put it all on the mushroom, you never put it all on an herb, you never put it all on your meditation. You spread those things out. It matters if you sleep enough. Food, sleep, and sex being the 3 pillars of Ayurvedic medicine, right? So how are you eating? How are you sleeping? Like what is going on with your, relationship to your creative energy, which is where I would put the sex model as well, and say like, what is going on with that which you're birthing and that which is dying within you. And that's where, psychedelics, while not I would say from my background, not an Ayurvedic, necessarily path there, it can be really understood from that lens as well. And when we take away that pharmaceutical mindset, or I'm going to even rephrase it to call it a colonial mindset, because really what it is we're colonizing these relationships. And we're looking at these relationships through the same transactional mechanisms that we take Tylenol or ibuprofen or and I can't remember which one of you mentioned, but like, the molecule to fit in the problem and then just solve the problem. All I was visualizing when you're saying that was like CRISPR. Like this CRISPR is like the ultimate way, right? We got to cut out a piece of that which we didn't like, and we're going to put in a piece of something else. And wow, what cool technology and everything. But it really gets rid of the complexity, the nuance, and all the beauty that exists, within a relationship to a plant. It's hard to have a beautiful relationship with Tylenol. It doesn't mean you can't. It doesn't mean you can't take that moment to sit with the medicine that you're going to take in, because I don't believe it's only just the plants and the fungi. We know that MDMA has incredible effects. We know LSD has incredible effects. So your Tylenol does too, right? So we can even decolonialize our relationship with Tylenol by sitting down and considering like, what am I putting in my body? Asking the molecules to really work as best as they can in our bodies and to do what they need to do for us. The same way we really need to approach our relationships with entheogens, with all these ideas around PMDD and like disorders of the female system. We can't divorce them from disorders of how the divine feminine is experiencing the world. Like patriarchy hurts our bodies more than anything. There's nothing quite so stifling to the flourishing of a womb-having body as having someone else try to take sovereignty over your womb. This is a really big mental health issue for many, many women, and a cognitive dissonance issue among even those who are opposing the individual right to womb sovereignty. And I say that because the vast amount of women who get abortions are Christian identified. So what do you think we have as a like cognitive dissonance in the background going on when we have we've got attacks on women's rights happening. We've got, I believe 1 in 3 women has experienced some kind of physical sexual violence. We have just an enormous, like the statistics are really hard to ignore. You have to ignore them on purpose. So the fact that we're still ignoring some of these statistics, like the fact that like the rape numbers are so high, the fact that the women are being medicated at twice the rate of men on antidepressants. What does it say when we've been telling women with an autoimmune condition for the last 30 years that it was all in their head? Turns out fibromyalgia is an autoimmune condition and is absolutely diagnosable. We've been gaslighting women through the medical industry for so long that if we don't think that this has like an impact on our cells, on our DNA, and that which we pass on to our children, like we're fooling ourselves. So I love the idea of just decolonializing all of it. It doesn't mean you can't look at the double-blind Western studies. They're super useful. Diagnostic equipment, super useful. Even as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I really enjoyed sending people for blood labs and hormone metabolite panels and things like that, because it's very helpful information. It is not, however, the answer when somebody comes and says, can I treat PMDD with psilocybin? I usually hesitate for like a full minute and say, maybe. And we also need to look at your environment. Are you feeling respected in your home? During the time when you're running up to your menstrual cycle, are you experiencing sexual harassment at work? Are you like being constantly like talked over in your meetings? Are your ideas being taken by your boss? Like there's a lot of things that go into PMDD, as it were, considering, it's considered mental emotional condition. It's more classified by the lack of emotional resources than it is about a physiological impact, right? So like when we're looking at it that way, we can't not look at, I'm sorry, my helper here. We have to look at the entirety of society first. And then down to like, what is that one person with a womb who has a menstrual cycle? What is her experience of life? Does she have access to good food? Does this person have 3 jobs, and are they a single parent? All of that matters about whether you have PCOS, PMDD, all of the female problems. None of them are fixable by one molecule. I have yet to see this be the case. So I guess that's just my sort of ranting on the on patriarchy in the system. And I did bring this up to a well-known doctor who's a woman, who's in the Canadian psychedelic space. And I think she misheard me because she said, "Oh no, we really need to bring in men. We can't alienate men." And I said, it's not about alienating men. Patriarchy hurts men too. Also in the mental health space, also in the trauma space, men are spending a lot of time in psychedelics unwinding trauma that society imposed on them through patriarchy. So if we don't call out patriarchy as not just a fringe feminist concept, but in fact, the lens which informs all of our healthcare and all of our society, we're not going to really get very far. And psychedelics are wonderful at like allowing us to kind of go back into that womb space and remother ourselves. So if we can, instead of colonializing those medicines, like I wonder what this molecule is doing in my brain right now and the impact it's having on said neurotransmitter, and instead having a relationship with a medicine that's trying to teach us something, I think that's where, going back about one of you said, dude, going to break the pharmaceutical system. Agreed. and bless it. May it be broken and rebuilt.
I was going to jump in really quick. I appreciate that you brought up the life experiences of a person. That matters to how we dive into looking at a condition, or what are the treatments for a condition, or what can help. Essentially, I think one of the things that was really fascinating to me to learn through the research that I was doing on other things was that if a woman is going through menopause and she's had adverse childhood experiences, which are called ACEs for short, the more adverse childhood experiences that she's had, that potentially can lead to worsening symptoms from menopause. And so we can't just throw medicine at menopause. We have to look at it from the totality of a person's life to see how potentially they're experiencing this transition And so I just wanted to add that because what you said really resonated with me. So thank you.
I'd love to go really big with this for a moment because where we are in this moment in time is this big shift towards a more ecosystem model of understanding everything. Andrea, you started by talking about the ecosystem of the different parts in our own body, not expecting one part of our lives to do all the heavy lifting, that we have all these components in our own life and our own history, and seeing that even within ourselves is an ecosystem. And I see psychedelics as being very supportive to getting clarity on what's happening in your own inner ecosystem and doing some work to balance that out, and also teaching you the ongoing work you have to balance that out. And then we spread out into this ecosystem with our communities and with the cultures that, are over culture, and then all the pieces of cultures that move within that, and our ecosystem with broader nature in general. And a lot of us notice that the getting away from this ecosystem mindset, which was more prevalent in indigenous and ancient wisdom traditions, has led to a lot of the problems that we have right now. And I see entheogens as being really supportive in helping us remember, as you said earlier, the way the ecosystems work. And we're even seeing that in dialogues around evolution. And we have this sort of Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest, and it was competition that created a thriving ecosystem. And now the understanding is ecosystems evolved and developed together, and there's a lot more sharing and passing of nutrients and information in even among supposedly competing species or individuals within species than was previously known. So we're in this, I said I was going to take it big, we're in this big shift towards more ecosystem type awareness. And I'm just hearing that in everything that you're sharing, that this comes all the way down to, in my own body as a human, especially as a female human, how am I an ecosystem? And that's so different from my body as a machine that's holding my brain. And how is my machine breaking down? Okay, I'm going to fix that part.
Yeah, thank you so much, Betsy. I'm just I'm watching what I'm tuning into right now as well, and kind of with the bigger picture in health and wellness and the way psychedelics folds into that as well. And very exciting. And there's also obviously the potential for sort of this reach and grab and kind of repeating the old thing of like, who owns this and who is the authority? And then we repeat this thing where we start out in collaboration and sharing these beautiful experiences with each other, and then end up like trying to be the loudest one in the room. And so I'm appreciating that is something that the plants help us learn anyway by working with them, how to work in that ecosystem, like you said, Betsy. And it's interesting too, because we also have this great place for innovation, and we can make a whole series of shares and episodes on a lot of the subjects we touched on today. But especially this place again, where it's like we've been through this period where some of the patriarchy, even though it's caused some damage, has also created some really, really beautiful things and some really amazing innovations. And, has also helped some of us as individuals get through things that we might not have 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when we were working with a different kind of mode of living with each other. So I'm excited to see where those two things come back together also, where we can actually like include the more sort of like left brain function and the way we take things apart to see how they fit back together, as well as the holistic systems and that middle ground. And I feel like kind of what is happening is these two different areas are just getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And naturally, as they get closer, sometimes we're going to butt up against other things. Sometimes we're going to butt up against each other. But ultimately, I think we're all trying to kind of look and see the same thing here. So I'm really appreciating the perspectives that you all have brought here today. I'd like to just go around maybe one more time and have you share a little bit about the work you're offering right now and how folks could get in touch with you. And I'm watching our time here, but I also would love if you might even just share a little bit of what you would like to see in the world, where you would like to see the world go with this. Andrea, I'll have you go ahead and take it.
Yeah. Well, how to get in touch with us? You can follow us at Microdrops. That's Microdrops with a Y, MYCRODROPS. We're at Microdrops on all socials. We have specific support programs also for facilitators. So reach out, Andrea at microdrops.com. So one of those big things is get in touch with me, and we'll talk about all this stuff because I can't stop talking about it at this point. And then, what I would like to see, I would like to see more women and people of color getting platformed at conferences around psychedelics. What I see generally is Native women being called in for DEI work and for closing and opening ceremonies. And Black women being called in for DEI work, and sometimes that's it. And the reality is, beyond that, there's so much more wisdom beyond the very important work of diversity, equity, inclusion. There's also all this Indigenous wisdom, all this Black wisdom, all of this wisdom that we're missing out on because of the whiteness of the psychedelic space. So not only do we need to elevate the female voices, we need to elevate the voices of people of color. Mama De La Mica is a wonderful example. Follow her on Instagram. Silly Girls, PSI Silly Girls, follow them on Instagram as well. I think it's important beyond just looking at the gender of the space that we go more into, okay, we're not just tokenizing people for what they understand in the space, because there are Indigenous people that also hold doctoral degrees. There are Black people that also hold doctoral degrees. Why can't we just give a little bit more voice and a little bit more platforming and lift to those people? So that's one of the things I'd really like to see, as far as the putting money where the mouth is, where we see the patriarchy meeting the I don't like to say, because patriarchy to me is different than divine masculine. So I don't believe we've gotten a lot of the good stuff from patriarchy. I think we've gotten it from the masculine energy in general. That kind of doer builder model, that energetic model, which is important and absolutely right there. But I would like to see us stopping being afraid of the use of the word patriarchy, because it's really highly associated with this feminazi model that is easily discounted by men when they talk about it. So it's hard to talk about the elephant in the room if the elephant isn't recognized. So I guess I'd like to recognize all of those elephants, whether they are patriarchy or systemic racism, and how those things are going to show up in the psychedelic space and are showing up in the psychedelic space. So we do have to confront those. So that's what I'd like to see.
Thanks, Andrea. Jennifer, I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I have the Psilocybin Handbook for Women that is coming out on June 6, 2023. It's available for pre-order right now. If you just Google the title, you'll come up with a link to buy it from whichever distribution channel you would like. I encourage people to purchase from independent bookstores, of course. And I have a locally owned, female-owned independent bookstore where I will be doing. I'll be signing anyone who pre-orders from there, and that bookshop is called The Bookshop Nashville is the URL. So I think it's the bookshopnashville.com. So I hope you buy from there, and I will certainly sign the book before you receive it. What do I want to see from the world? Oh my, a lot. But I think I'm a huge proponent of decriminalization. So for all psychedelics, but not only that, all drugs, because I've learned a lot in my research. And I think one of the things that really sticks out to me is when we criminalize drugs, we're really criminalizing people. That's been echoed to me from lots of experts. It's not my own words, so I don't want to take credit for that. But I think that's an important thing. And then I think in doing that, we help to reduce some of the fear surrounding some of these unknowns about these about entheogens and other psychedelics. And so, because I think that when we have criminalization and stigma, there's a lot of unknowns, and it's like hush hush, we're not allowed to talk about it. And I think a lot of women who may benefit from psychedelics for whatever purposes, whether that's spiritually or for something that they're dealing with bodily, they don't have access, not only because these medications are decriminalized, are criminalized. It's also because there's stigma based around that. And I want that to go away. That's a big wish, but I like to think big. So
Hear, hear. Thank you.
So I agree, Jennifer, that this stigma creates this space of, I got to do this in secret. And that's where I would like to see this go, and where I'm really passionate is getting away from this idea of, we're going to do all of this work in private, whether that's alone with a practitioner, a medical practitioner, or in our own secret journaling time. And I have to figure this all out secretly and on my own before I can ever step out into the world and present this perfected version of myself. And I see that as another patriarchal concept as well. And so going through the integration work, not just on our own, and exploring our inner ecosystem of the relationship with our mind, with our bodies, with our emotions, with our community, and with our environment, not just in our own private time, but starting to do it with communities of other people. And as we destigmatize, as we elevate these, not just these voices, but also these types of conversations, and make them allowable, creating more spaces where women can be having these conversations. What I really see is when women transform in themselves and heal all of those levels and step into a bigger role for themselves, and do it in their relationships and in their communities, that this is where the culture shifts and this is where the changes happen. And so that's what I am doing as a coach. I no longer offer one-on-one coaching. I'm only offering groups for women, because I found every single one of my clients at some point came to me and said, well, what I really want is to live an intentional community. What I really want is to find some kind of commune that actually works. I was like, wow, this deep, deep, deep craving that we have for community is so important. And so I'm not going to sit in a private secret room with a client anymore, because that's not helping them ultimately meet their needs. And so I'm so appreciative for Spirit Bird for modeling this and bringing in a group of people together. So I can be found at BetsyOliver.com, and that's Betsy spelled with an I, BETSI, Oliver.com. And I'd love to invite anyone into one of my groups going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for being here today and sharing in this conversation. And yeah, I would love to do it again sometime, multiple times. I know that each of you again has, a pretty unique perspective and brilliant expertise that probably deserves lots more time and attention. But I'm glad that you were able to make the time to share with us today. Of course, I'm going to be sharing the way you can get in touch with all of the guests here in the show notes. So make sure you check there for their links. And also, Andrea has offered a $10 off through microdrops.com when you use the code SpiritBird10. So I'll be sure to include that in the notes as well. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that, and giving us an opportunity to play with your beautiful product. Thank you so much, Betsy, for sharing your perspective and your wisdom, and you as well, Jennifer. And until next time, thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll see you soon. Welcome to today's Member Query episode, where we explore questions about spiritual paths, intuitive gifts, growing a spiritual business, and shamanism. Do you have a question for us? Send us a DM at Holton Healing Arts. This question actually is from one of our shaman school students, and it's a question I get a lot around ending negative habits, bad habits, or things that you think are bad habits. And so my advice to you here is, instead of trying to stop or quit the habit, instead of trying to punish yourself into not doing the habit anymore, your job is actually to become the person that doesn't do that habit in the first place. So taking a moment to really, maybe even just closing your eyes and settling in and tuning in to the version of you that isn't interested in that habit anymore. And just take a moment and notice qualities that they have, things that they do, other habits that they have. What can you learn and know about that version of yourself? And so your job is to actually become that. Focus on doing that and becoming that person instead of trying to cut out or quit this old version or old habit of what you're doing right now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading with Spirit. And if you did, please share the link for this episode with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Holton Healing Arts. It would also support me if you subscribed and left a rating and review of the show so we can support more people living their highest purpose. Until next time, journey on.